What happens when a man who has everything decides it's not enough? Gregory Shaw was a master of the universe, a high-flying wealth manager with a perfect, beautiful wife, Caroline. But he traded her in for a younger model, Sienna. He thought he was upgrading his life. He didn't realize he was just a self-made man who had in fact been made by his wife's family. He thought he was dumping the quiet, comfortable Caroline Davenport. He was actually declaring war on the Davenports. And the Davenports, they don't lose. This is the story of how a man's pride led him to the penthouse, and how one family threw him from the top floor without ever touching him. Gregory Shaw loved the smell of new leather. It was the scent of success. He breathed it in from the back of his midnight blue BMW 7 Series, a car he'd earned by closing the Reynolds importing deal. At 42, Greg was the youngest senior partner at Sterling Price Investments. He had a razor-sharp part in his dark hair, a collection of Swiss watches that rivaled a jeweler's display, and a jawline that still held strong thanks to rigorous, twice-daily gym sessions. He was by every metric he cared about a resounding success. His wife Caroline was part of that success. She was, he often thought, the perfect corporate wife. She was 40, but possessed a timeless, understated beauty. She wore beige cashmere and simple pearl earrings, her blonde hair always in a tasteful low chignon. She ran their Greenwich, Connecticut home with effortless precision. She was a Davenport. The name had a quiet, old-world resonance in New England. Good stock, Greg's father had called her. To Greg, good stock meant comfortable. He knew her family had money. It was obvious in the way she never looked at price tags in the modest trust fund she'd used as a down payment on their first home, in the easy, boring way her father, Harrison Sr., would talk about gifting a new wing to the local hospital. They were comfortable. Greg was ambitious. The two were not the same. Greg's ambition was a hungry, gnawing thing. He didn't just want comfort, he wanted impact. He wanted to be the man people whispered about. He craved the sharp, electric thrill of a new acquisition, a new deal, a new anything. Lately, that new anything had a name: Sienna Hayes. Sienna was 25. She was a new associate in his firm's marketing department. Where Caroline was cashmere and pearls, Sienna was leather and blood-red lipstick. She was all sharp angles, quick laughter, and a hungry ambition that mirrored his own. She looked at him not with the placid, supportive gaze of Caroline in-law, but with the raw, undisguised admiration of a woman looking at a winner. Their affair started, as they so often do, with a mentorship lunch. It escalated during a business trip to Chicago. It was now a raging fire, fueled by stolen afternoons in a boutique hotel room overlooking the park, the kind with a $40 a bottle sparkling water in the mini-fridge. "You're incredible, Greg," Sienna whispered, tracing the lapel of his Zegna suit one rainy Tuesday. "The way you handled that Taggart client. You didn't just advise him. You commanded him." Greg let a small, satisfied smile play on his lips. "It's just about seeing the angles, Sienna. Knowing what people want before they do." "And what do you want, Greg?" Her eyes, a bright, startling blue, held his. He thought of his perfectly beige, perfectly predictable, perfectly dull life with Caroline. He thought of her quiet dinners, her talk of the children's school fundraisers, her gentle reminders about his blood pressure. He compared it to the raw electric jolt of Sienna's touch, the smell of her black opium perfume, the way she made him feel like the predator he knew he was. More. he said, his voice a low growl. "I want more." That evening he drove home to Greenwich. The house was, as always, perfect. The landscaping was immaculate. The lights were a warm, welcoming yellow. Caroline was in the kitchen, a cavernous space of white marble and stainless steel. She was helping their 9-year-old son, Thomas, with his geography homework. "Hey," she said, smiling, pushing a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "You're late. Everything okay at the office?" "Just clients," he said, loosening his tie. "You know. Well, dinner's ready. I made that salmon you like with the dill sauce." He looked at her. The perfect wife. The perfect home. The perfect budding gilded cage. He looked at the salmon. He looked at the beige sweater. And he felt a sudden sharp surge of revulsion. "I'm not hungry," he said. His tone was sharper than he intended. Caroline's smile faltered just for a second. "Oh. Okay. Well, I can save you a plate." "Don't. I'm going to go for a drive." He turned before he could see the hurt in her eyes. He walked back to his BMW, the car that smelled of new leather and success. He pulled out his phone and texted Sienna. "Can't stop thinking about this afternoon. Us. This is what's real." Her reply was almost instantaneous, a single chili pepper emoji. Greg Shaw put the car in gear and peeled out of his own driveway, his tires spitting gravel on the perfect lawn. He was a master of the universe, and he was finally going to take what he truly deserved. He was going to get more. The next 3 months were a masterclass in duplicity. Greg Shaw operated on a new level of energy, fueled by adrenaline and the thrill of his double life. He was a lion at the firm closing 2 of the biggest accounts in Sterling Price's history. He was a phantom at home, a man of half-eaten dinners, late-night conference calls, and vague excuses about market volatility. Caroline, in her quiet way, tried to bridge the chasm. She suggested a weekend in Vermont, like we used to. Greg claimed a client emergency. She bought tickets to the symphony. Greg forgot and scheduled a strategy dinner with his team, which was just him and Sienna at a trendy new fusion restaurant. The more Caroline tried to hold on, the more Greg despised her for it. Her gentle patience, which he once found calming, now felt like a lead weight. Her good stock felt like a chain. Sienna, meanwhile, was all forward momentum. "Greg, have you seen the listings for the new Astra Tower?" Sienna showed him her phone over brunch. They were at a rooftop bar, the kind of place where the mimosas were $28 and the clientele were all under 30. The penthouses have private plunge pools. Private. Can you imagine? Greg could imagine. He imagined a life of sleek, modern lines of floor-to-ceiling glass, of not having to look at Caroline's sentimental antique furniture, which he always felt was just old. "We'd look good up there," Sienna purred, sipping her drink. "We would," Greg said, his mind already calculating. The breaking point came at the annual Children's Legacy Gala, the largest fundraiser of the year for the hospital. It was, for all intents and purposes, Caroline's event. Her mother, Isabella Davenport, was the chairwoman of the board. The event was the Davenports. Greg hated it. He hated the chicken or fish dinners. He hated the forced politeness. He hated the way these men, old soft men, who had inherited their wealth, would pat him on the shoulder and call him son, as if he weren't the one actively creating wealth while they just existed. "Greg, darling, you remember Carter Reynolds?" Caroline was at his elbow, a vision in a deep emerald gown. Greg turned. "Carter Reynolds of Reynolds." importing the deal he'd personally closed. Carter, a man in his late 60s with a face like a friendly bulldog, beamed at him. Greg, the man of the hour. My boy, I don't know what you did, but my portfolio hasn't looked this good since the 90s. Greg gave his best "aw shucks" smile. Just doing my job, Carter. Glad you're happy. Happy I'm ecstatic. You know. Carter leaned in. I was hesitant at first. Sterling Price is a fine firm, but, well, let's be honest. It was Harrison Davenport's personal call that sealed the deal for me. He said, my son-in-law is the sharpest mind in the state, and I'm putting my own assets with him. Well, that was good enough for me. Greg's smile froze. Harrison Sr. had called Carter. His father-in-law. He thought he had landed Reynolds. He thought it was his pitch, his strategy. The realization that it might have been a simple phone call from Caroline's father landed like a punch to the gut. It made him feel small, like a kid who'd been given a win. He looked over at Caroline, who was blissfully unaware, chatting with another couple. He suddenly saw her, not as his wife, but as a symbol of his own inadequacy. A living reminder that he hadn't perhaps done it all on his own. His anger, cold and immediate, needed a target. Later that evening he was standing by the bar when a text came through. Sienna. Bored. Thinking of you. Wish I was there in a killer dress. He typed back, his thumb jabbing the screen. You should be. This whole thing is a joke. Gregory. He jumped, shoving his phone in his pocket. It was Isabella Davenport, his mother-in-law. She was a tall, imposing woman, draped in diamonds that were clearly real. Her smile never, ever reached her eyes. Isabella. Wonderful party, as always. It is, she said, her eyes flicking to his pocket. You seem distracted, Gregory. I do hope you're not finding our little charity boring. Not at all, he lied smoothly. Just checking on the Asian markets. They open early. Ah yes, the markets. She took a sip of her champagne. You've been doing so well, Gregory. We're all so impressed with how far you've come since you joined our family. There it was again. Joined our family. The implication was clear. We made you. He was suffocating. He turned, looking for Caroline. He found her by the silent auction tables, laughing with her brother, Harry Davenport, Jr. Harry was the one he liked least, where Harrison Sr. was old-world class. Harry was a shark in a Savile Row suit, the C-suite operator who ran Davenport Global Holdings DGH with ruthless efficiency. Greg strode over his face, a mask of polite fury. Caroline, he said, not bothering to greet Harry. We're leaving. Caroline's laugh died. Leaving, Greg, it's not even 10. My mother is giving her speech soon. I don't care. I have an early day. We're going. His voice was low, hard. Harry's eyes narrowed. He was taller than Greg and stood up straighter. Everything all right, Greg? You seem a bit flushed. I'm fine, Harry. Just tired of the party. He grabbed Caroline's arm a little too tightly. Let's go. Caroline flinched. The music seemed to dim. He saw Carter Reynolds staring. He saw Isabella Davenport, her face like a marble carving, watching from across the room. He didn't care. He was done. He was done with their world, their rules, their patronizing help. The car ride home was a symphony of silence. The new leather smell in the BMW suddenly felt suffocating. As they pulled into their perfect driveway, Caroline finally spoke, her voice trembling. "What was that, Greg? You embarrassed me. You embarrassed us." "I embarrassed you." He slammed the car into park. "I'm suffocating, Caroline, in this perfect beige life, this comfortable life you and your family have built for me. Built for you, what are you talking about? We built this together." "No. You built it. Your father made a phone call." "I'm just the son-in-law. The pet broker you all get to pat on the head. Look how far he's come," he sneered, mimicking Isabella. Caroline stared at him, her face pale. "Greg, that's not true. My father, he believes in you. We all do." "Well, I don't need his belief," he roared, finally giving voice to the dragon of his pride. "I don't need any of it. I don't need the house, I don't need the club, and I don't need you." The words hung in the air, cold and deadly. Caroline's face crumpled, then hardened. The tears that welled in her eyes she refused to let fall. She simply stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. "Get out," she whispered. "What? Get out of my house." "Your house?" He scoffed, but a sliver of fear pierced his rage. "This is our house." "No, Greg," she said, her voice finding a strength he'd never heard. "The down payment was my trust. The house is in my name. I was advised to do that in case of this. Get out." He stared, dumbfounded. He had been so busy building his new life that he never realized the foundation of his old one was not what he thought. "Fine." He spat, his pride stinging more than the rejection. "Fine. This is a favor. You're saving me the trouble." He went inside, past a stunned-looking Thomas who had woken from the noise and packed a single expensive leather overnight bag. He stormed out, got back in his BMW and peeled away again. He drove straight to Sienna's tiny, generic apartment. He buzzed, and she opened the door wearing a silk robe. "Greg, what are you—" He pushed past her, dropped his bag, and grabbed her. He kissed her hard, a kiss of anger and liberation and desperation. "I left her," he said, breathing hard. "It's done. I'm free." Sienna's eyes widened, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. "Oh, Greg," she said, wrapping her arms around his neck. "It's about time. Let's order champagne." As he held her, Greg Shaw felt a giddy, terrifying rush. He'd done it. He'd burned the bridge. He was his own man, finally and completely. He was on top of the world. The next day, Greg Shaw walked into the offices of Sterling Price, not as a man who had just blown up his 15-year marriage, but as a king returning to his throne. The anxiety of the previous night had burned away, leaving a cool, clean certainty. He was free. His partner, Ben Kitteridge, a perpetually stressed man with a paunch, pulled him aside before the morning meeting. "Greg, saw you and Caroline leave the gala in a hurry. Everything. Okay, Isabella Davenport looked like she could freeze fire." Greg adjusted his tie, a new one, a bold crimson red. "Everything's fantastic, Ben. Crystal clear. Caroline and I are separating." Ben's jaw dropped. "What? Greg, are you insane? The Davenports. You don't just separate from the Davenports. They're your biggest client. Harrison Sr.'s portfolio is half your book." Greg laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "First Harry Jr. manages the real DGH money in-house. I just handle Harrison's personal fund, which is a rounding error for him. Second, I've got Reynolds. I've got the Taggart brothers. I've got the new Whitaker endowment. I don't need Harrison's pocket money." "Greg," Ben pleaded, "think about this. The optics, the..." The optics, Greg interrupted, are that I'm a man taking control of his life. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm moving into the Astra Tower. I have to call the leasing office. He left Ben sputtering in the hallway and strode into his office, the one with the corner view. He was high on his own power. He called Sienna. "It's done," he said, putting his feet up on his mahogany desk. "Meet me for lunch. We're celebrating, and we're apartment hunting." The divorce proceedings began with a predictable chill. Greg, feeling magnanimous, offered what he considered a generous settlement. He'd let her keep the house, which he now knew was hers anyway, and he'd provide a handsome child support package for Thomas. In exchange, he wanted a clean break. He wanted it fast, and he wanted it quiet. His lawyer, a shark named Rick Feldman, had warned him. "Greg, this is too easy. The Davenports aren't rolling over. Caroline's lawyer is from that firm, Kessler, Lynch and Associates. They don't do easy." "They will this time," Greg insisted. "She's not a fighter. She just wants it to be over." The first meeting was held at the Kessler, Lynch and Associates offices, a building that looked more like a fortress of old money than a legal practice. Greg and Rick sat on one side of a table so long it could have hosted a state dinner. Caroline entered, flanked by two lawyers. One was a severe-looking woman in her 60s. The other was her brother, Harry Davenport, Jr. "What is he doing here?" Greg hissed to Rick. "This is a conflict of interest." "It's not," Rick whispered back. "He's here as a family advisor." "Shut up, Greg." Caroline looked different. She was wearing a sharp, dark blue pantsuit. Her hair was down, not in its usual chignon, and it gave her an air of authority he'd never seen. She looked, he realized, with a jolt like her brother. "Gregory," she said, her voice as cool as the marble in the lobby. "Thank you for coming." "Let's just get this over with," Greg said, projecting boredom. "The offer is on the table. It's more than generous." Caroline's lead lawyer, the severe woman, simply slid a single piece of paper across the table. It wasn't a counteroffer. It was a list. Rick Feldman picked it up. He read it, and all the color drained from his face. He passed it to Greg. It was a list of Greg's assets. But it wasn't just his salary and his 401k. It was everything. The Reynolds importing account, commission value, none. 2M, the Taggart Brothers account. Commission, value 980k. The Whitaker endowment. Projected retainers, 550 annum. The unvested stock options at sterling price. The 529 college fund for Thomas Shaw. Beside each of the major accounts was a small, chilling annotation. Reynolds Importing acquired via personal introduction from Harrison Davenport, Sr. Jan 20 and 23. Taggart Brothers, referred by DGH subsidiary. Apex Logistics, June 2022. Whitaker Endowment Board. Seat held by Isabella Davenport. September 2023. Greg's blood ran cold. This wasn't a divorce settlement. This was an audit. This was a receipt. "What is this?" Greg tried to bluster. "These are my clients. I brought them in." Harry Davenport, Jr. spoke for the first time. His voice was soft, almost bored. "No, Greg. You serviced them. We placed them. There's a difference." Harry leaned forward. "You see, Greg, my family believes in loyalty. We believe in taking care of our own. For 15 years, you were our own. My sister loved you, so we made sure you were successful. We made sure the right doors opened. We made sure the right people took your calls. We gave you the assists, All you had to do was make the basket." He paused, his eyes like steel chips. "You had a good game, but you mistook the assists for your own talent." "This is ridiculous," Greg said, his voice shaking slightly. "You can't. These are my clients." "Are they?" Harry smiled, a thin reptilian expression. "Well, that's a theory. Let's test it." He looked at Caroline. "Caroline, what do you want?" Caroline looked at Greg. Her eyes were not filled with tears or anger. They were empty. It was the emptiness that terrified him. "I want what I am owed," she said, her voice clear. "He built a new life on the back of the one we gave him. He's moving into the Astra Tower with his associate. He's planning a future." She slid a second piece of paper across the table. This one was from the leasing office of the Astra Tower. It was his application for the penthouse, the one with the plunge pool. It listed his projected income, an astronomical figure based on the commissions from Reynolds, Taggart, and Whitaker. "I want him to have exactly what he deserves," Caroline said. "Nothing more, and nothing less." Greg looked at Rick, frantic. "They can't do this." Rick Feldman was slowly packing his briefcase. "Greg, my advice is to take the first offer. The one you made. Take it and walk away. Now." "What? You will work for me. And I'm telling you as your lawyer, this is not a fight you can win. This is a cost of doing business negotiation, and you've just been declared bankrupt. They're not just divorcing you, Greg. They're liquidating you." Greg looked back at the Davenports. Caroline was staring at her hands. Harry was checking his Patek Philippe watch. This is a shakedown," Greg yelled, standing up. "Sit down, Gregory," Harry said, not even looking up. "You're embarrassing yourself. We're not shaking you down. We're just correcting the ledger." Harry finally looked at him. "You wanted a clean break. You wanted to be your own man. Congratulations. As of, well, let's say tomorrow, you will be. My father and my mother and we're just divesting from you." "Is that a threat?" Greg snarled. "No," Harry said, standing. "It's a quarterly report, and your numbers are way down." He helped Caroline with her chair. She stood, never making eye contact with Greg, and walked out. Harry followed, pausing at the door. "Oh, and Greg," he said, a polite, venomous afterthought. "The house in Greenwich, Caroline, is selling it. Seems the market is unusually high. You have 30 days to retrieve your personal effects. Good luck with the Astra Tower. I hear the co-op board is very particular." The door clicked shut. Greg and Rick sat in the cavernous, silent room. "Rick," Greg said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "What just happened?" Rick Feldman snapped his briefcase shut. "What happened, Greg, is you just brought a knife to a nuclear war. You thought you were divorcing a quiet suburban wife. You've just declared war on a global corporation. My retainer is paid up. I'm done. Find a new lawyer." Rick walked out, leaving Greg Shaw alone at the massive table, staring at a piece of paper that had just turned his entire life into a lie. Greg Shaw was a fighter. He wasn't some soft trust fund kid like Harry Davenport. He was Greg Shaw. He'd built himself up from nothing. So they wanted a war fine. "He's bluffing," he told Sienna that night, pacing her small white-on-white apartment. The cheap champagne from the night before felt like a distant memory. "Harry's a bully. He's trying to scare me. Correcting the ledger. What a joke my clients are with me because of me. my performance, my numbers. Sienna, who had been painting her toenails a shade of neon pink, looked up. So, that list, they can't actually take those clients, right? Of course not, Greg scoffed. This is America. This is capitalism. They can't just take my book. I have contracts. I have relationships. Good, she said, her smile returning. Because I just put a deposit down on a new couch for the Astra. It's Italian leather. You'll love it. Exactly, he said, pulling her close. This is our time. He's just noise. They're all just noise. He doubled down. He spent the next week in a frenzy of activity. He took Carter Reynolds to a $1,000 a plate steak dinner. Carter, my man, Greg said, pouring a glass of eye-wateringly expensive Cabernet. I just want you to know I'm going through some personal changes, a divorce. But it's not going to affect our business. If anything, I'm more focused than ever. Carter Reynolds, his face ruddy, clapped Greg on the back. Son, I don't care about your personal life. I care about my ticker, and my ticker is up. Keep doing what you're doing. Greg grinned. See a joke, a bluff. He called the Taggart brothers. He met with the Whitaker Endowment's COO. Everyone was happy. His performance was undeniable. The Davenport threat was just the pathetic flailing of a jilted family. He and Sienna moved into the Astra Tower. The co-op board interview had been strange. The board president, a man named Arthur Pierce, had looked at Greg's financials with a cold, appraising eye. Impressive numbers, Mr. Shaw, Pierce had said. Very volatile, but impressive. Your sterling price correct. Senior partner, Greg said, puffing his chest. I know. Of sterling price, Pierce said. We'll be in touch. But 2 days later, the approval came through. Greg and Sienna moved into the penthouse. It was magnificent. The city skyline was laid out at their feet. The plunge pool was, as Sienna noted, to die for. They threw a party. They invited all of Greg's colleagues except Ben Kitteridge, who was being weird, and all of Sienna's young, beautiful friends. It was a perfect crystalline moment of triumph. Greg stood on his new terrace, a glass of champagne in hand, Sienna on his arm. He looked out at the city. His city. Told you, he whispered to her. Top of the world. The first crack appeared on a Monday. Greg was in his office admiring the view, which was, he noted with satisfaction, slightly better than his old one, when his assistant, a nervous young woman named Chloe, buzzed him. Mr. Shaw, Mr. Reynolds is on line 1. He sounds upset. Greg frowned. Upset Carter was never upset. He picked up the phone. Carter, what's happening? You see that jump in tech this morning? Greg. Carter's voice was gravelly. I'm pulling my money. Greg dropped his pen. What? Did you see the quarterly reports? We're up 18%. I don't care about the reports, son. I got a call this morning. From Harrison Davenport. Greg's blood turned to slush. Carter, listen to me. This is a personal matter. His daughter, my wife, we're getting a divorce. He's trying to hurt me. He's being petty. I don't know what it is, Greg, Carter said, and for the first time he sounded cold. But what I do know is that Harrison Davenport Sr. is on the board of the Port Authority, and my entire business is Reynolds Importing. My import-export license is my docking priority. These things are under review. All of a sudden, after 20 years. He can't do that. He's not. Of course not. Carter said, his voice heavy with sarcasm. It's just a routine audit of my business. A business that suddenly has irregularities. The same day Harrison calls me just to say hello, and mentions how disappointed he is in the younger generation's lack of loyalty. You get me, Greg? Carter. Please. I'm sorry, son, I really am. I like you. But I like my company more. My assets are being transferred to a new firm. Don't call me. The line went dead. Greg stared at the receiver. 1.2 million in commissions. Gone. He was sweating. He was actually sweating. Chloe, he yelled. Get me Jerry Taggart. I can't, Mr. Shaw. Chloe's voice was small, shaky. What do you mean, you can't dial the damn phone? His office called this morning to say they were transferring their portfolio. They're moving to Morgan Stanley. Why? Greg whispered, a horrible, sinking feeling in his stomach. Their primary logistics carrier, Apex Logistics. They just terminated their contract. Cited breach of terms. The Taggarts, they said they were over-leveraged and had to liquidate some assets to cover the I don't know. The freight disruption. Apex Logistics. The DGH subsidiary. Greg's hands were shaking. He pulled up his client list. Reynolds. Taggart. Who was next? The phone buzzed again. Chloe again. Mr. Shaw, it's Ben Kitteridge. He needs to see you, now. Ben walked in, his face grey. Greg, we have a problem. I know we have a problem, Greg snapped. I'm losing clients. No, Greg, Ben said, sitting down heavily. We have a problem. The Whitaker Endowment just pulled their money. This was impossible. The endowment was a board. It took months to make a decision like that. Why? Greg asked. Isabella Davenport, Ben said. She's not just on the board, Greg. She's the founder. Her mother was Whitaker. She is the endowment. She called an emergency session this morning, motioned to divest from any and all firms with high-risk profiles and questionable ethical foundations. Questionable ethics. That's slander. Is it, Greg? Ben looked at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and fear. The motion passed unanimously. They're gone. Greg, that's 40% of our new acquisitions for the entire year. Greg stood up his chair, scraping violently. He walked to the window. The beautiful, clear view suddenly seemed hazy. They did this, he whispered. They actually did it. Greg, Ben said, his voice low. The partners are meeting this afternoon. You need to get ahead of this. Call Harrison. Apologize. Beg. I don't care. Fix it. Because, Greg, they're not just correcting the ledger. They're burning the whole goddamn book. The final smallest crack appeared on his phone. A text from Sienna. OMG. Got the bill for the Italian sofa. It's $30,000. But it's non-refundable. Had to use my personal Amex. You'll pay me back, right? Greg looked at the text. He looked at his skyline view. He thought of the plunge pool. He thought of Carter Reynolds. He thought of Harrison Davenport's polite, dead voice. He wasn't on top of the world. He was standing on a trapdoor. And the Davenports had just pulled the lever. Panic is a cold, metallic taste. For Greg Shaw, it tasted like the $15 cup of coffee. He was now stirring his hand, shaking so violently that the black liquid sloshed onto the glass table of his new penthouse. Fix it, Ben had said. How do you fix a nuclear bomb? He called Harrison Sr.'s office. He was told Mr. Davenport is in a board meeting, for the foreseeable future. He called Harrison's private line, the one he'd been so proud to have. It went straight to a disconnected message. He called Harry Jr.'s office at DGH. He was put on hold for 20 minutes, forced to listen to a Vivaldi loop, before a crisp assistant informed him, "Mr. Davenport's schedule is committed through the next quarter." He tried to call Caroline. He wanted to. What? Yell, beg, apologize. He didn't know. Her number, the one he'd had memorized for 15 years, was also disconnected. He was an island, and the tide was coming in. The partners' meeting was a bloodbath. He walked in, trying to project his usual confidence, but the faces that looked back at him were not friendly. They were terrified, and they were looking for a sacrifice. "Greg," said the senior partner, an old hawk-nosed man named Robert Sterling. "Explain your book, now." Greg tried. He blustered. He talked about short-term volatility and personal conflicts and market corrections. Ben Kitteridge, his friend, just sat there staring at his legal pad. "So what you're saying's," Robert Sterling summarized, his voice dripping with ice, "is that you personally antagonized the single most powerful family in this state, and in doing so have vaporized 3 of our anchor accounts in 48 hours. It's not. I built those accounts," Greg protested, his voice high. "You cost us those accounts." Another partner, a woman named Janice, snapped. "My clients are calling. They're asking if Sterling Price is stable. They're asking why our senior partner is in a public feud with Isabella Davenport." "My God, Greg, do you know what she is?" "She's not just a charity person. She's the gatekeeper. She's the social center of gravity for all of our clients." Greg realized with dawning horror that Caroline's quiet, boring mother was the linchpin of the entire New England financial social ecosystem, and he had just called her daughter. Well, he'd just discarded her. "We're done," Robert Sterling said. "The partners have voted. You're out. We're activating the moral turpitude clause in your contract." "Moral turpitude," Greg shrieked. "I had an affair." "Half this room is on their 3rd wife. You didn't have an affair, Greg," Janice said, standing up and gathering her papers. "You had an affair with an employee, which is a sexual harassment liability. And you did it while divorcing a Davenport, which is just terminal stupidity. Clean out your desk. We'll mail you your things." He was escorted out. His building pass was deactivated. His company email was shut down before he even reached the elevator. He stood on the sidewalk in his $3,000 suit, holding his briefcase. He had been a senior partner at 10:00 a.m. By 11:30 a.m. he was nothing. He went home to the Astra Tower, home to Sienna. He found her in the living room, surrounded by boxes, not his boxes, her boxes. She was packing. "Sienna," his voice cracked. "Oh, thank God," she said, not looking at him. She was on the phone. Yes, I know the sofa is non-refundable. I'll take the store credit." She hung up and turned to him. Her face was different. The adoration was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, practical fury. "My internship," she said, her voice flat. What about your internship?" "You're not an intern. You're an associate." "My associate position, Greg. The one at Sterling Price. The one you got for me." "It was restructured. I was just restructured. Out of a job." "Sienna, baby, listen." He reached for her. She flinched, pulling away. Don't you baby me. I just got a call from HR. I'm fired. And then I get a call from some woman. A lawyer. Caroline's lawyer. No. Some other lawyer from DGH Apex Logistics. She told me that my fast-track hire at Sterling Price had been facilitated by a DGH subsidiary as a favor, and that favor was now rescinded. They own Sterling Price. No, Greg said, confused. They're just a client. Are they, Greg? Sienna's eyes were wide with a terror. He recognized it was the same one he was feeling, because the lawyer said that DGH holds the primary commercial lease on Sterling Price's building, that they're their biggest corporate client through 6 different shell companies. She said, "We own the pasture, Greg. We just let him think he was the bull." She said, "Greg." "Yes, she told me to tell you that." And then she told me that my work visa, I'm Canadian. Greg, did you even know that was sponsored by that subsidiary? And it's being revoked. I have 30 days. I have to go home. She looked at him, and all the black opium and leather and ambition had vanished. She was just a 25-year-old girl who had gambled on the wrong horse. You lost," she whispered, her voice breaking. I picked the loser. Sienna, I can fix this. I have savings. We can. Savings, Greg, we're in a $40,000 a month penthouse. That sofa is $30,000. Your savings are gone. It's gone. Don't you get it? You didn't just lose your job. You're radioactive. You're nothing. The nothing hit him harder than loser. And another thing, she said, her voice turning to pure venom. Your credit card, the one you gave me for the apartment, it was declined. For the sofa. For the goddamn groceries. Greg pulled out his phone. He opened his First Union Commerce Bank app. His accounts, his checking, his brokerage, account frozen, pending review. He stared. They can't do this. They did, Greg. Sienna zipped up her last suitcase. I guess your wife wasn't as comfortable as you thought. She walked to the door. Oh, and the co-op board they called. Arthur Pierce. He said their pre-approval was what did he call it? A conditional income offer. And since your income is, 0, they're terminating the lease. We have to be out by the end of the week. Not 30 days. 5 days. Sienna, wait. She paused at the door. You know, Greg, I feel sorry for her. Your wife. Not because you left her, but because she had to be married to you for 15 years. You're not a lion. You're not a master of the universe. You're just a pet. And you bit the wrong owner. Goodbye, Greg. The door to the penthouse clicked shut. He was alone. In a $40,000 a month apartment he couldn't afford, with a $30,000 sofa he didn't own, and a bank account that was frozen solid. The city skyline outside the floor-to-ceiling windows seemed to be laughing at him. The squeeze was complete. He was financially and socially suffocated. For 3 days, Greg Shaw was a ghost in his own life. The silence of the $40,000 a month penthouse was absolute, broken only by his own frantic, useless phone calls. His bank accounts at First Union Commerce remained frozen. A polite, detached manager informed him it was a risk management flag related to a pending legal matter they were not at liberty to discuss. He tried to retain a new lawyer, but a digital iron curtain slammed down the moment he mentioned the names Davenport and divorce. No one was available. No one was a good fit. No one had a conflict of interest. He was blacklisted. He had to be out of the Astra Tower by Friday. He'd been forced to sell his Vacheron Constantin watch, his Chicago watch, to a back-alley jeweler for a fraction of its value just to have cash. Cash for what? A motel desperation finally clawed through his paralysis. He had to see her. He had to see Caroline. If he could just talk to her, explain, apologize, beg. He didn't even know. He just knew he couldn't be. This. He took a taxi to Greenwich to the house. As he pulled up, he was stunned. The perfect manicured lawn was a sea of mud scarred by heavy truck tires. A massive industrial dumpster sat in the driveway where his BMW used to be. The front door was open, replaced by a sheet of plywood. He walked inside, his stomach clenching. The house was gutted. The sweeping staircase was covered in tarps, wires hung from the ceiling. The white marble kitchen. Caroline's pride was gone, just exposed studs and plumbing. It wasn't a home. It was a demolition site. "Caroline!" he called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous dead air. "She's not here." Greg spun around. Harrison. Harry Davenport Jr. was standing in the archway of what used to be the dining room. He wasn't in a suit. He was wearing jeans work boots and a black pullover holding a rolled-up set of blueprints. What did you do?" Greg stammered. "What is this tool?" "Renovating," Harry said, his voice casual, as if they'd run into each other at a bar. Caroline never liked the flow. She found the whole suburban Tudor vibe suffocating. Your word, I believe. Where is she? Where is Thomas? Paris, Harry said, tapping the blueprints against his leg. With my mother. Thomas loves the new apartment overlooking the Eiffel Tower. Funny he hasn't asked about you once. The casual, devastating cruelty of it stole Greg's breath. You did this, Greg whispered, gesturing at the ruins of his life. My job, my clients, my bank account. Harry looked at him with an expression of mild curiosity. Did we? I don't think we did anything, Greg. We just undid. We stopped. Harry leaned against a raw 2x4. You're not that smart, are you? You really thought you were a self-made man. He didn't even have to move. The power radiated from him. Let's do the ledger, Greg. Your first big break, that biotech fund that made you junior partner. That was a DGH venture fund. We fed you the intel. We let you discover it to build your reputation. Your clients, Carter Reynolds. My father sits on the Port Authority. One routine audit, and Carter's entire import business gets lost in customs forever. The Taggart brothers. Their logistics carrier, Apex, is us. We just rerouted their supply chain. They were happy to move their money to get their shipments back on track. The bank? Greg whispered, the blood draining from his face. First Union. Harry actually laughed. Oh, that's my favorite. Greg, DGH acquired a 51% controlling stake in FUCB in 2019. It was a portfolio diversification. My father sits on the risk committee. Your frozen account. That's just standard procedure when a high-risk individual, say someone with massive sudden income losses and a pending divorce from a high-value asset. Well, the bank has a fiduciary duty to protect itself. We're just protecting ourselves. From you. It was all one system. They didn't just have money. They owned the board. And Sienna, Greg said, the last piece falling into place. My sister, Harry's voice hardened, is a very detailed person when she's upset. Caroline was heartbroken for about a day. Then she got organized. She's a Davenport. She made a list. She found Ms. Hayes's Canadian visa was sponsored by a subcontractor. Of ours. A simple phone call. Greg's legs gave out. He sat down on the tarp-covered stairs. You built me up. Just to do this. No, Harry said, his voice now cold. We built you up because my sister, my quiet, gentle, brilliant sister loved you. She saw a spark in you and she begged my father. Help him, Daddy, she said. He just needs a chance. Harry crouched eye level with Greg. And you took that chance, her love, her family's power, and you used it to build a bird bath for a 25-year-old in a tacky penthouse. You were too busy looking at yourself in the reflection of the things we gave you to ever see her. He stood. So no, Greg, we didn't do anything to you. We just stopped holding you up. And you just fell. This is who you are, without us. Harry pulled a check from his pocket. A First Union Commerce Bank check. He tossed it onto Greg's lap. This is $50,000, Harry said. It's from Caroline. She's concerned you'll end up homeless. It's her one failing, the pending legal matter on your other accounts. That's the divorce. Her lawyers are going to argue dissipation of marital assets, the penthouse Sienna, the Italian sofa. They're going to enjoy taking it out of out of nothing. 50,000. Greg looked at the check. It was charity. Take the check, Greg. Get a bus ticket. Go to Arizona. I don't care. But you're uninvestable in New England. You're no longer associated with the family. Consider this a social and financial deletion. Harry walked to the plywood-covered door, then paused. She didn't just gut the house, Greg. She's renaming the hospital wing, taking your name off the plaque. He left. Greg Shaw sat in the hollowed-out shell of his former life in a cloud of plaster dust, holding a charity check. He hadn't been defeated in a war. He had simply been erased. Pride Gregory Shaw learned doesn't vanish in a single explosive moment. It's a death by 1,000 cuts, a slow, agonizing erosion that leaves you hollow. The $50 and $1,000 from Caroline was the first and most exquisite cut. It was both a lifeline and a final, crushing insult. It was enough money to survive, but not enough to live. It was, as Harry had intended, bus ticket money. He used $5,000 of it to move his expensive suits and textbooks, the artifacts of Gregory Shaw, senior partner, into a bleak metal-doored storage unit in Stamford. He used another $1,500 to rent a room. Not an apartment. A room. It was in a shared house in Bridgeport, a town he used to fly over. His roommate was a 22-year-old line cook who played video games at high volume and left instant noodle cups in the sink. The rest of the money he hoarded, watching the balance with a terror he'd never known. He, a man who used to move 7-figure blocks of assets, was now afraid to buy the premium brand of toilet paper. He had to get a job. He printed his resume. Senior partner, Sterling Price Investments. MBA, Wharton. Proven track record. He walked into a local branch of a regional bank. He was overqualified, and he knew it. The branch manager, a woman in her late 40s, looked at his resume with wide eyes. Mr. Shaw, this is quite a resume. Why did you leave Sterling Price? It was a personal conflict, Greg said, trying to sound dignified. A disagreement with the board. I see. She typed his name into her computer. Her face, which had been skeptical, suddenly became very still. She read her screen for a long, silent minute. "Mr. Shaw," she said, her tone changing to a crisp, professional chill. "I'm afraid we don't have any positions available that fit your profile." "My profile?" "My profile is excellence." "Your profile, sir," she said, not looking at him, "is flagged in the central compliance system. We are not able to move forward with your application." He didn't need to ask. Isabella, Harry, the Davenports. They hadn't just blacklisted him socially. They had put a permanent digital mark on his name. He was, in the language of finance, a toxic asset. He tried headhunters, the ones who used to call him weekly, poaching him for firms in New York and London. The initial calls were warm. "Greg, good to hear from you." Then came the typing pause. "Ah, Greg, you know the market is very tight right in this quarter. Very specific. I don't seem to have anything at all. Let me get back to you." They never got back to him. Weeks turned into a month. The money was dwindling. He was forced to sell the suits from the storage unit. He took them to a high-end consignment shop where the owner sniffed. "Zegna. Very nice. But this power look is a little dated." Greg, the man with the $3,000 suits, walked out with $800. He was, in every sense of the word, liquidated. He finally found a job. He had to. He saw a "now hiring" sign in the window of an Enterprise rent-a-car counter at the airport. The manager, a kid in his late 20s named Scott, didn't ask for a resume. He just needed someone who could wear a tie and upsell. "The job is simple," Scott explained. "They reserve the Ford Focus, you get 'em into the Suburban, and you sell the insurance. The insurance is the whole game. You get me? You get me?" "I can sell," Greg whispered. So Gregory Shaw, Wharton MBA, now worked at the airport. He was, to his own disgust, good at it. He'd get a tired family and say, "Sir, I see you reserved the compact, but with you 3 kids and this luggage, you're just not going to fit. I can upgrade you to the minivan for just $30 more." He was a shark, still a shark, but now he was in a puddle fighting over minnows. His pride, it was gone. He was just a survivor. The crushing, the real final crushing, came 3 months later on a cold, rainy Tuesday. A private jet, a Gulfstream G650, landed at the signature FBO across the tarmac. Scott, the manager, was vibrating with excitement. "Shaw, go get the black Escalade. The whale is here. Detail it, now, and don't screw this up." Greg detailed the car. He vacuumed the carpets. He wiped the windows with a cloth, his cheap polyester tie flapping in the wind. He drove it across the tarmac to the sleek private hangar. The Gulfstream's stairs descended, and she walked out. Caroline. But it wasn't the Caroline he knew. The beige cashmere was gone. She was wearing black leather pants, a cream silk blouse, and sunglasses so large they covered half her face. Her hair was down, blowing in the wind. She looked like a movie star. She was laughing, her head tilted back. Behind her was another man. Not Harry. This man was tall, with graying hair at the temples, wearing a beautiful unstructured linen jacket. He was laughing too. He put his hand on the small of Caroline's back, and she leaned into his touch. Greg just froze. He stood there in his ill-fitting black pants, his plastic Greg name tag, holding the car door open. Caroline saw him. The laugh died in her throat. She stopped. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes met his. There was no anger, no hate, no sadness, not even pity. There was nothing. Just a brief, mild flicker of recognition. The same look you'd give a cashier you vaguely remembered from a store you'd visited 7 years ago. The European man looked at Greg. "Is this the car?" His accent was French. "Yes," Caroline said. Her voice wasn't shaking. It was smooth. She reached into her purse, a crocodile Birkin bag Greg noted with a dying part of his brain, and pulled out a roll of cash. She peeled off a single, crisp $100 bill. She handed it to Greg. "Thank you for waiting," she said. That was the crushing. Not the job, not the money, not the apartment. This nothingness. This transaction. He wasn't her ex-husband. He wasn't the man who broke her heart. He was the car rental guy. His hand shook as he took the money. We need your license and a credit card," he whispered, the Enterprise script coming out of his mouth on autopilot. The Frenchman laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "Oh no, it is all handled. By DGH, of course." He put his arm around Caroline's shoulder. "Come, chérie, let's go. I want to show you the house." They got into the Escalade. The car Greg had vacuumed. They drove away. Greg Shaw stood on the tarmac in the rain, holding the $100 bill. It was a tip. From the woman he'd thought he was too good for. He finally understood. He hadn't lost. He had never even been in the game. In the end, it wasn't a corporate takeover. It wasn't a dramatic public confrontation. The crushing of Gregory Shaw's pride was a simple, quiet, soul-crushing deletion. He thought he was the lion, but he was just a logo on a letterhead that the Davenports decided to redesign. Caroline's family didn't destroy him with anger. They destroyed him with indifference. They simply took back everything they had loaned him, his clients, his status, his reputation, his credit, and left him with the only thing he truly owned, his own arrogance. And it turns out, that's not worth very much on the open market. What do you think? Was this a real-life story of consequences, or did the family go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If your jaw is on the floor right now, please do not keep this story to yourself. The best revenge is living well, but the best stories are the ones that are shared. Like this video if you believe he got what he deserved. Share it with a friend who needs to see what happens when you underestimate the quiet ones. And most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon. You think this story was wild? You have no idea what I have coming next. On the grandest night of the year, beneath the glittering chandeliers of the St. Regis, Grand Sean Butler was celebrated as the city's philanthropic king. He was the man who had everything, a sprawling real estate empire, the respect of his peers, and a breathtakingly beautiful wife, Helen, on his arm. But while hundreds of guests toasted his name, Helen wasn't smiling beside him. She wasn't even in the ballroom. She was shivering in the pitch-black cold of a basement wine cellar, locked in by the very man they were all applauding. Her husband had silenced her to protect his perfect image. What he never counted on was that someone else was watching someone who knew the darkness that hid behind a dazzling smile, the one man in the room with the power to burn Sean's world to the ground. The ride to the annual Gilded Cage Gala was suffocatingly silent. The air in the back of the Rolls-Royce Phantom was thick with unspoken threats, a familiar tension that coiled in Helen Butler's stomach like a serpent. Her husband, Sean, sat beside her, a statue carved from ambition and rage. He hadn't spoken a word, since she'd walked down the grand staircase of their sterile minimalist mansion. He'd simply looked at her, his gaze sweeping over the custom-made sapphire silk gown, his lip curling in a way that wasn't a smile. "The dress is too much," he finally said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the plush leather seats. He didn't look at her, instead staring out at the rain-slicked streets of downtown Chicago. Helen's hands, already clammy, tightened around her small clutch. "It's the gala, Sean. It's our gala. Everyone is dressed up." She had chosen the dress to feel strong, a sheath of armor in a vibrant, defiant blue. "It draws attention," he clipped back. "Your job is to be an elegant accessory, Helen. Not the main event. The main event is me. It's securing the final investment from Kenji Tanaka for the waterfront project. An accessory. That's all she had been for the 5 years of their marriage. A beautiful, well-educated and silent partner who looked good in photographs and could charm the wives of potential investors with her knowledge of art and literature. But beneath the surface, she was a prisoner. Her life was a meticulously curated exhibition of Sean's success, and any deviation from the script was met with cold fury. Her friends had been slowly pruned from her life, deemed unsuitable or too influential. Her access to her own family trust was managed through Sean's accountants. He had built her a gilded cage and convinced the world it was a palace. Tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight was supposed to be the end. Tucked inside her clutch beneath her phone and lipstick was a small memory card. On it were copies of the documents she had found in his private study last week, hidden inside a false-bottomed humidor. They were offshore account statements, falsified permit applications, and a detailed ledger of bribes paid to city officials for the very waterfront project he was so desperate to fund tonight. He wasn't just cutting corners. He was building his empire on a foundation of pure fraud. The discovery had been the final brutal crack in her denial. His control, his jealousy, his temper. It wasn't a flawed man's idea of protection. It was the desperate terror of a con artist afraid of being exposed. She had already contacted a lawyer, a discreet woman named Patricia Chen, and had a plan. After the gala, she was going to her sister's place. On Monday, they would file. "Are you listening to me?" Sean's voice snapped her back to the present. His hand shot out and gripped her wrist, his fingers digging into the delicate bones. "When we arrive, you will smile. You will talk about the foundation, about the children's wing we are funding. You will not drink more than 1 glass of champagne. And you will stay by my side. Understood?" Helen looked at his hand on her wrist, at the gold signet ring, pressing a painful indentation into her skin. She felt a surge of something hot and unfamiliar, pure, unadulterated hatred. She met his cold grey eyes in the dim light of the car. "Let go of me, Sean." Her voice was quiet, but it held a new steel he wasn't accustomed to. He stared at her for a moment, surprised by the defiance. A flicker of something truly ugly crossed his face before he smoothed it over into his signature mask of authority. He released her wrist, leaving angry red marks behind. "Don't test me tonight, Helen. You have no idea what I'm capable of." Oh, but she did. She was just beginning to understand. The gala was being held at the half-finished penthouse level of his newest skyscraper, a cavernous space with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic, godlike view of the glittering city. The raw concrete and exposed steel were artfully draped in white silk and fairy lights, creating a dramatic contrast that the society pages would rave about. For the first hour, Helen played her part perfectly. She smiled until her cheeks ached, shook hands with politicians and tech moguls, and listened to Sean lie with practiced ease about his philanthropic passions. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, admiring her dress, her poise, her life. If only they knew. She saw Mr. Tanaka arrive with his entourage, a serious-looking man, whose approval Sean craved like a drug. Sean immediately pasted on his most charming smile and steered Helen toward them. "Tanaka-san, so glad you could make it. You remember my wife, Helen?" Helen inclined her head gracefully. "It's a pleasure to see you again, Mr. Tanaka." As Sean launched into his sycophantic pitch, Helen felt a wave of nausea. She couldn't do it. She couldn't stand here and be a part of this lie for one more second. She needed air. "If you'll excuse me," she murmured, placing a hand on Sean's arm. "I just need a moment." Sean's smile didn't falter, but his eyes turned to ice. He gripped her elbow, his fingers like talons. "We're in the middle of a conversation." "I'm feeling a little faint," she whispered, a plausible excuse in the stuffy, crowded room. She let her eyes flutter slightly, a trick learned from years of having to feign weakness to avoid his wrath. He was trapped. He couldn't make a scene in front of the man he was trying to impress. With a barely perceptible nod, he released her. 5 minutes. The powder room off the main hall. But Helen didn't go to the powder room. She turned down a corridor marked for staff, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her plan had been to wait until after the gala. But his touch, his threats, they had accelerated everything. She couldn't spend another minute as Mrs. Sean Butler. She pulled out her phone to call the car service she had secretly arranged. She was just about to press send when a shadow fell over her. Going somewhere. Sean. He had followed her. The public charm was gone, replaced by a terrifying, predatory stillness. "I told you I needed air," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You're a terrible liar, Helen. I saw your face. You were running." He took a step closer, backing her against a service elevator. "What did you think you were going to do, haul a taxi? Where would you go? Everything you have, everything you are, is because of me." "That's not true," she whispered, clutching the memory card in her purse like a talisman. His eyes narrowed. He was a cornered animal, and his instincts were sharp. He glanced down at her clutch. "What's in the bag?" Before she could react, he snatched it from her hand. He opened it and dumped the contents onto a nearby catering trolley with a loud clatter. Her phone, her lipstick a compact mirror, and the tiny black memory card. He picked it up, holding it between his thumb and forefinger, as if it were a dead insect. "What is this?" Helen's blood ran cold. "It's nothing. For my camera." He stared at her, his face a mask of dawning incandescent rage. He knew. He didn't know how he knew, but he knew she had crossed a line. "You went into my study." It wasn't a question. He grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. "You stupid, ungrateful woman. Did you really think you could ruin me?" He began dragging her down the corridor, away from the distant sound of the orchestra. "Sean, stop! You're hurting me!" she cried, her heels scraping against the concrete floor. They reached an unmarked metal door. He swiped a key card from his wallet and pulled it open, revealing a set of steep, dark stairs leading down. The air that wafted up was cold and smelled of dust and damp stone. "Where are you taking me?" she pleaded, terror finally breaking through her resolve. "You wanted some quiet time to think." I'm going to give it to you, he hissed, yanking her down the stairs. You are going to stay down here and reflect on your loyalty. After my deal with Tanaka is signed and the party is over, I'll come back for you. And we will have a very, very long conversation about your future. He dragged her across a dusty basement floor and stopped in front of another heavy door. He unlocked it, revealing a space of absolute blackness. It was the building's wine cellar, still under construction. No, Sean, please. He shoved her inside. She stumbled, falling to her knees on the cold, hard floor. The sapphire dress, her beautiful armor, was now just a scrap of silk in the dirt. He stood in the doorway, a monstrous silhouette against the dim light of the basement. Enjoy the party, my love. The heavy door slammed shut, plunging her into a terrifying, suffocating darkness. The click of the deadbolt echoed in the small space, a sound of absolute finality. She was alone, buried alive in the heart of her husband's triumph. The darkness was absolute. It was a physical presence pressing in on Helen from all sides, stealing the air from her lungs. For the first few minutes, panic was a wild animal clawing at her throat. She scrambled back to the door, her hands slapping against the cold, unyielding steel. Sean, let me out! Sean. Her voice was swallowed by the insulated walls. The only sound was the frantic, ragged rasp of her own breathing and the frantic drumming of her fists. He was gone. The music, the laughter, the life of the party upstairs, it was on another planet. She was in a tomb. Slowly, painfully, the adrenaline subsided, replaced by the biting cold of the cellar. The thin silk of her gown offered no protection against the damp chill seeping up from the concrete floor. Shivering, she pulled her knees to her chest, trying to conserve what little warmth she had. Tears of rage and terror streamed down her face, hot at first, then cold against her skin. How could she have been so stupid to think she could simply walk away? Sean had never been one to lose. He didn't just defeat his opponents, he annihilated them. And she had just declared herself his opponent. Her mind raced, replaying every moment. The memory card. He had it. He would destroy it, and with it, her only leverage. He would come back for her, as he promised, and the life he would design for her now would be infinitely worse than the gilded cage she'd known before. It would be a true prison, stripped of all illusions. Hours seemed to crawl by. In the disorienting blackness, her sense of time dissolved. She could hear the faint, deep thumping of the bass from the orchestra above, a ghostly heartbeat, reminding her of the world she was no longer a part of. With each distant thud, she pictured him. Sean working the room, his face a mask of easy charm. Sean shaking Tanaka's hand, his eyes glittering with success. Sean accepting toasts, the conquering hero. And no one, not a single person in that room of 1,000 people knew his wife was locked in the darkness beneath their feet. The thought was so grotesquely ironic, it almost made her laugh, a broken, hysterical sound that died in her throat. The fear began to curdle into something else, a slow-burning, icy rage. He had underestimated her. He saw her as a possession, a fragile doll to be put on a shelf or locked in a box. He had never not once seen the woman she was, or the woman she could become. Lying on the cold floor, stripped of everything, Helen made a vow. If she got out of this room, this wouldn't be the end. It would be the beginning. She wouldn't just leave him. She would dismantle him. She would take a sledgehammer to the fraudulent empire he was so proud of and watch it turn to dust. Upstairs in the glittering ballroom, Declan Reese felt a prickle of unease. He was a man who trusted his instincts, instincts that had helped him build a multi-billion-dollar investment firm from the ground up by seeing the cracks in a flawless facade. And right now the facade of Sean Butler was showing a hairline fracture. Declan hadn't wanted to come tonight. He found Sean to be a loathsome creature, all flash, no substance. A peacock puffed up with other people's money. But his firm was a minority stakeholder in the Tanaka Corporation, and Kenji Tanaka had personally requested his presence as a sign of goodwill before finalizing his own investment in Butler's project. Declan's interest, however, was not in Sean, but in his wife. He had met Helen Butler once before, a year ago, at a museum benefit. They had spoken for only 10 minutes, but it was enough. She wasn't like the other vapid social climbing wives that populated this world. She had a quiet intelligence, a genuine passion when she spoke of art, and a profound sadness in her eyes that a happy woman shouldn't possess. He'd also recognized her name. Her father, the late Professor Alistair Finch, had been a legendary art historian and a mentor to Declan in his university days. Alistair was a man of fierce integrity and intellect, and Declan couldn't fathom how his brilliant daughter had ended up married to a brute like Sean. Tonight, he'd watched her. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. He saw the brutal grip Sean had on her wrist when they were in the car, and the flash of defiance in her face. And then he saw her leave the ballroom, followed a moment later by a thunderous-looking Sean. That was nearly 2 hours ago. Sean had returned alone, his mood strangely buoyant, schmoozing with Tanaka as if he hadn't a care in the world. But Helen was gone. Declan casually made his way over to Sean, who was holding court by the champagne bar. "Sean, spectacular evening," Declan said, his voice smooth and neutral. Sean turned, his smile widening when he saw who it was. Having Declan Reese acknowledge him was a major social coup. "Declan, good to see you. Glad you could make it. We're doing great things here." "Indeed. I was just admiring the view. I haven't seen your wife Helen for a while. I was hoping to ask her about a new acquisition of mine. I trust she's well." Sean's smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the edges. "Ah, yes. Helen." She was feeling a bit overwhelmed by the crowd. A sudden migraine. "I had my driver take her home an hour ago. She was terribly disappointed to leave. It was a perfect lie. Plausible, polite, and unverifiable. But Declan's internal alarm bells were ringing loudly. The Helen he'd briefly met didn't seem like the type to be felled by a simple murrain on her husband's biggest night, and there was a flicker of something triumph cruelty in Sean's eyes that didn't match the story of a concerned husband. Declan nodded, feigning acceptance. "A shame. Please send her my best for a speedy recovery." He walked away, but he wasn't satisfied. He scanned the room, his eyes sharp and calculating. He noted Sean's security detail, their positions, their demeanor. He noted the layout of the floor, the staff corridors, the elevators. He was a man who solved problems by collecting data, and right now the data wasn't adding up. His gaze fell on the floor near the entrance to the main staff corridor. Something glinted under the lights. It was small, metallic. While others were distracted by a toast, Declan moved smoothly toward it, bending down as if to adjust his shoe. He picked it up. It was a small, exquisitely crafted lapel pin in the shape of a silver falcon, and his blood ran cold. He knew this pin. He had gifted it to Professor Alistair Finch himself 20 years ago as a token of gratitude. Alistair had told him he would give it to his daughter one day, as it was a family crest of sorts. Helen had been wearing it on the shoulder of her sapphire gown tonight. He looked from the pin in his hand toward the staff corridor. Then he looked at Sean, laughing across the room, a man celebrating a victory. Helen hadn't gone home. She was somewhere in this building, and the pin lying discarded on the floor like a breadcrumb told Declan that she hadn't left willingly. Declan Reese didn't build his empire by being impulsive. He was a strategist, a man who saw the whole board, not just the next move. Panicking or confronting Sean publicly would achieve nothing. It would give Sean the moral high ground and paint Declan as a meddling rival. No, if Helen was in trouble, he needed leverage. He needed proof. He pocketed the silver falcon pin, its sharp edges pressing into his palm. It was a tangible link, a piece of the puzzle. He discreetly approached one of the catering captains, a frazzled-looking woman with a headset. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "I seem to have misplaced my phone. I believe I may have left it downstairs when I came up through the service entrance. Would you mind letting me have a look?" He flashed a disarming smile. "I'm a bit lost without it." The woman, flustered at being addressed by a man of Declan's stature, fumbled with her own keycard. "Of course, Mr. Reese. The service elevator is just down this hall, but the basement is mostly storage and construction. I'm sure it's just sitting on a crate somewhere. I won't be a moment." She swiped her card, and the elevator doors slid open. "It's level B1, sir. Just let me know if you need anything." "Thank you." The doors closed, and Declan was alone. The descent was swift. The polished glamour of the penthouse gala gave way to the stark industrial reality of the building's skeleton. The elevator opened onto a cavernous, dimly lit concrete basement. The air was cool and smelled of wet cement and sawdust. A labyrinth of corridors stretched out, lined with stacked drywall pallets of tiles and plumbing fixtures. The distant thump of the music was more pronounced here, a muffled, ghostly rhythm. Where would a man like Sean hide his wife? Not somewhere obvious. Somewhere secure. Somewhere out of the way. Declan started walking his expensive leather shoes, silent on the dusty floor. He followed the main corridor, his eyes scanning for anything out of place. He passed storage rooms, electrical panels, and utility closets. Everything was locked. He thought about the falcon pin. It was found near the staff corridor entrance upstairs. Sean must have been dragging her. She must have tried to fight back to leave a sign. It was a deliberate act of a desperate, intelligent woman. He reached the end of the main passage, which branched into two smaller corridors. One led to the parking garage ramp. The other was a dead end terminating at a single heavy-duty steel door. It looked different from the others, newer, more fortified, with a high-security digital and key lock. It was the kind of door one would install for a vault or a wine cellar. He approached the door and listened. Nothing. He pressed his ear against the cold steel. For a moment, there was only silence. Then he heard it, a faint, rhythmic scratching sound. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Someone was inside. He examined the lock. It was a complex system. He couldn't force it without creating a massive disturbance. He needed a key card. Sean's key card. Confrontation was now the only option, but it had to be on his terms. He took out his phone and sent a quick encrypted text to his personal security chief, a former Mossad agent named Ben. The message was simple: Butler Tower. Basement level. Possible hostage situation. Await my signal. Silent entry protocol. Then he went back upstairs. He re-entered the party with a placid expression, a wolf in sheep's clothing. The gala was in full swing. He saw Sean accepting congratulations from the mayor. Mr. Tanaka was at his side, looking pleased. The deal was likely done. Sean was at the absolute peak of his triumph. It was the perfect moment to shatter it. Declan intercepted a waiter and took 2 glasses of champagne. He walked directly toward Sean. "Sean, a word," Declan said, his voice cutting through the chatter. Sean turned, a smug, proprietary look on his face. "Declan, enjoying the party? I trust you heard the good news. Tanaka is in. The waterfront is a go." "Excellent news," Declan said, handing him a glass of champagne. "To your success." Sean preened, raising his glass. "To success." They both took a sip. As Sean lowered his glass, Declan leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that only Sean could hear. "I have a question for you, Sean. It's about your wine cellar." Sean's smile froze on his face. The color drained from it in an instant. It was a subtle shift, but to a predator like Declan, it was a massive tell. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do." Declan continued, his voice still a silken whisper, though now laced with ice. "The one in the basement. The one with the very secure lock. I'm concerned about the acoustics. I was wondering if you could hear a woman screaming from inside it." Sean's glass trembled in his hand. "You're insane." "Am I?" Declan opened his own hand. Resting in his palm was the silver falcon pin. Helen dropped this. A lovely piece. A family heirloom, I believe. Her father gave it to me for safekeeping years ago. The lie was seamless, designed to inflict maximum psychological damage. Sean stared at the pin, and in his eyes Declan saw it all: rage, panic, and the dawning horror of being caught. "I am going to walk over to Mr. Tanaka and the mayor right now," Declan said, his voice deadly calm. "And I am going to tell them that you have your wife locked in the basement. I'll let them decide what to do with that information. Or you can give me the key card to that door, and we can handle this quietly. Your choice. You have 10 seconds. Sean was trapped. A public accusation from Declan Reese would be catastrophic, deal or no deal. It would trigger an investigation, and his entire house of cards would come tumbling down. He stared at Declan with pure, undiluted hatred. But he was above all a pragmatist. Silently, his movements stiff and jerky, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. He extracted a single black key card and pressed it into Declan's hand. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your life," Sean hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "No," Declan replied, closing his hand around the card. "You made it when you turned the lock." Declan turned and walked away without a backward glance. He sent another text to Ben's signal. "B1, North Corridor. Stand by." He took the service elevator back down to the silent concrete tomb. This time, as he walked toward the steel door, he felt no hesitation. He swiped the card. The digital lock beeped and flashed green. He turned the heavy deadbolt. He pulled the door open. The scratching sound stopped. From the depths of the suffocating blackness, a figure slowly rose. Helen stood there, blinking against the sudden dim light from the hallway. Her sapphire gown was stained with dust. Her hair was a mess, and tear tracks marked her beautiful face. But her eyes were not the eyes of a victim. They were blazing with a cold, hard fire. She saw Declan, and a flicker of confusion crossed her face. "Mr. Reese," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Helen," he said softly. "It's all right. I'm here. Let's get you out of here." He extended a hand. After a moment's hesitation, She took it. Her hand was freezing cold, but her grip was surprisingly strong. As she stepped out of the darkness and into the light, she did not look back. Declan didn't lead Helen back towards the gala. He led her in the opposite direction toward the parking garage ramp. As they emerged into the cavernous, empty garage, a black, unassuming sedan detached itself from the shadows and glided to a stop before them. The back door opened. Ben Declan's head of security was at the wheel, his face impassive. "Get in," Declan said gently. "You're safe now." Helen slid into the plush leather interior, a space of warmth and quiet after the freezing cellar. Declan followed, closing the door behind him. The car pulled away smoothly, ascending the ramp and merging into the late-night Chicago traffic. The Butler Tower, a monument to Sean's ego, shrank in the rearview mirror. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Helen simply stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. She was wrapped in a cashmere blanket Ben had produced from the front seat, a cup of hot tea warming her icy hands. The shock was beginning to wear off, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and a trembling that she couldn't control. Declan gave her the space she needed. He didn't pepper her with questions or offer platitudes. He simply sat in the quiet presence of her survival, a silent guardian. Finally, in a small, raw voice, she spoke. "How did you know?" Declan looked at her, his expression serious. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver falcon pin, placing it in her open palm. Her fingers closed around it, a wave of emotion washing over her. "My father's pin. I tried to drop it. I didn't know if anyone would even see it, let alone understand." "Your father was my professor," Declan said quietly. "Alistair Finch. He was my mentor at Cambridge. He spoke of you often. He was immensely proud of your sharp mind and your eye for detail. When I saw the pin, I knew something was wrong. Alistair's daughter wouldn't be careless with something so precious." Helen stared at him, stunned. This enigmatic billionaire, this rival of her husband's, was connected to her past, to the father she still missed every day. It was an impossible coincidence, a lifeline thrown from a world she thought she had lost forever. "He thought the world of you," Declan continued. "He would be incandescent with rage if he knew what that man did to you tonight." The mention of her father's protective anger broke something in her. A single tear escaped and traced a path through the grime on her cheek. "He would," she whispered. "Sean, he found out I was planning to leave him. I found evidence, Mr. Reese, evidence of everything. Bribery, fraud. The entire waterfront project is built on lies. He locked me in there to silence me." "Call me Declan," he said softly, "and I believe you. I've suspected for years that Butler's success was hollow. The numbers never added up. He expands too fast, takes on too much leverage. It's the behavior of a gambler, not a builder." They drove to a discreet 5-star hotel where Declan kept a permanent residence. He didn't take her to a suite, but to a private wing secured by his own team. It was a midland opulent sanctuary, a world away from the violence and fear of the past few hours. A female member of Declan's staff was waiting with a change of clothes, toiletries, and a gentle professional demeanor. An hour later, Helen emerged from a hot shower, dressed in a simple silk blouse and soft trousers. The grime was washed away, but the chill remained deep within her. She found Declan in a large, quiet study, a fire crackling in the hearth. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand and a look of deep contemplation on his face. Sean will have my memory card by now, Helen said, her voice stronger. He'll destroy it. It will be my word against his. And he is the king of Chicago. Evidence can be recreated, Declan said, turning to face her. He may destroy the card, but he can't destroy the electronic trail. The bank transfers the shell corporations, the falsified emails. It's all there, if you know where to look. And I have people who are very, very good at looking. Helen walked further into the room. The vow she had made to herself in that dark cellar returned to her no longer a desperate fantasy, but a tangible possibility. I don't just want to leave him, Declan, she said, her voice low and intense. I don't want to just disappear and let him continue. He tried to bury me. I want to see his entire world turned to ash. Declan studied her. He saw the fire from the cellar was still there, burning brighter than ever. He saw the intelligence her father had spoken of, now sharpened into a weapon. He saw a woman who had been pushed past her breaking point and had come back stronger, harder. Good, he said with a slow nod. Because Sean Butler is a cancer, and the only way to deal with cancer is to cut it out completely. He took a sip of his whiskey. He made 2 mistakes tonight. The first was underestimating his wife. The second was making an enemy of me. A new dynamic was being forged in the firelight of that study. It was not the story of a damsel in distress and her white knight. It was the formation of a powerful, strategic alliance. Helen had the insider knowledge, the specific details of Sean's crimes. Declan had the resources, the power, and the ruthlessness to act on that knowledge. He has a painting, Helen said, suddenly her mind already working, piecing things together. A dagger. Dancer at the bar. He used it as collateral for a massive bridge loan to get the waterfront project started. He boasts about it constantly. It's his prized possession. Declan raised an eyebrow. I know the painting. It was sold at Christie's 3 years ago for $80 million. Helen looked directly at him, her eyes clear and certain. It's a fake. A forgery. It's the best I've ever seen, but it's a fake. My father taught me how to spot them. The canvas weave is wrong for the period. The cobalt blue pigment has trace elements that weren't available until the 1950s. I told Sean my suspicions a year ago. He told me I was being hysterical and to never mention it again. Declan stared at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was a predatory, dangerous smile. He finally understood. This was the key. Not the complicated web of bribes and shell companies which would take months to unravel in court. Bank fraud, using a forged masterpiece to secure a 9-figure loan. That was simple, brutal, and fast. Helen Declan said, his voice filled with a newfound respect. You are far more than your father's daughter. You are a weapon. And Sean has no idea you're aimed directly at his heart. The alliance was sealed. In that moment, Helen Butler ceased to be a victim. She became the architect of her husband's destruction. The next morning, the city was buzzing. The society columns were filled with effusive praise for the Gilded Cage Gala, calling Sean Butler a visionary and a titan of industry. There was a brief mention of his wife Helen having to leave early due to a sudden illness. Sean had controlled the narrative perfectly. To the outside world, everything was perfect. But in the secure, silent bubble of Declan's penthouse, a war room was being assembled. The first call was to Patricia Chen, Helen's lawyer. She arrived within the hour, a sharp, impeccably dressed woman in her late 40s with eyes that missed nothing. She listened to Helen's story without interruption. her expression shifting from professional concern to controlled fury. Imprisonment, assault, coercion. He's crossed so many lines he's not even on the map anymore, Patricia said, her pen flying across a legal pad. But he's insulated. We need something that cuts through the layers of corporate protection. Something undeniable. The painting, Helen said. The Degas. Declan, who had been listening from the sidelines, stepped forward. The loan collateralized by that painting is with Sterling Mutual Bank. Their CEO, Robert Lanning, is an old-school stickler for the rules. He's also a rival of mine. He would love nothing more than to see me fail, but he hates being made a fool of even more. The plan began to take shape, elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential impact. They wouldn't just expose the forgery. They would use it as a trigger to detonate Sean's entire financial structure. The team expanded. Declan brought in 2 of his most trusted specialists. The first was a forensic accountant named Miles, a quiet, unassuming man who could make spreadsheets, sing, and follow a money trail through the most complex offshore labyrinths. The second was an art expert, a former curator from the Louvre named Dr. Alistair Beck, a man with a legendary reputation and an almost supernatural ability to authenticate masterpieces. For security reasons, he would consult remotely from his home in Geneva. Helen became the linchpin of the entire operation. This was not Declan's revenge. He was merely providing the arsenal. The strategy, the targeting, that was all hers. She spent hours with Miles detailing every conversation she could remember about finances, every offhand comment Sean had made about his partners, his holding companies, his secret accounts. She reconstructed the timeline of his acquisitions and investments from memory, providing the framework for Miles to begin his digital deep dive. Her most crucial work was with Dr. Beck. They held encrypted video calls that lasted late into the night. She described the Degas from memory, her art historian's training coming to the forefront. The craquelure is too uniform. Doctor, she explained, her voice confident and precise. It's artificially aged, and the signature, the D, is slightly too looped. Degas's later signatures were sharper, more angular. Sean keeps the painting in his study under specially designed lighting that flatters the colors but hides the imperfections. He never lets anyone get too close. Dr. Beck, a formidable man with a shock of white hair, listened intently, occasionally asking sharp, probing questions about provenance documents and previous owners. He claims he has a complete provenance from the Durand-Ruel gallery, Helen said. But I noticed a gap, 14 months between 1941 and 1942. It's listed as Private Collection Switzerland. It's a classic forger's trick. Hide the piece during the chaos of war, and it re-emerges with a cloudy history that's difficult to verify. Indeed, Dr. Beck murmured, his eyes gleaming with intellectual excitement. You have a remarkable eye, Mrs. Butler. Just like your father. While Helen provided the intellectual firepower, Declan began moving the larger pieces on the chessboard. He didn't want to just expose Sean. He wanted to acquire his assets from the rubble. He started discreetly buying up Sean's corporate debt through shell companies. He opened back-channel communications with other investors in the waterfront project, subtly planting seeds of doubt about Sean's financial stability. He was creating a ring of fire around Sean's empire, ready to be ignited at a single command. The days were intense and purposeful. For the first time in years, Helen felt alive. The fear that had been her constant companion was replaced by a cold, clear focus. She was no longer Sean's accessory. She was his adversary. She ate, slept, and breathed his downfall. One evening, as she was poring over digital scans of pigment samples Dr. Beck had sourced. Declan entered the study with 2 glasses of wine. "You should take a break," he said, his voice softer than she was used to hearing. She looked up, rubbing her tired eyes. "I can't. We're close." Dr. Beck found a record of a master forger, a man named Jean-Paul Dubois, who was operating out of Switzerland during the war. He specialized in impressionists. It all fits. Declan handed her the glass. "It will still be there in the morning. Patricia has drawn up the official whistleblower complaint for the SEC. Miles has traced the wire transfers for the bribes to 3 offshore accounts. Dr. Beck is preparing his official report on the likely forgery of the dagger. All the pieces are in place, Helen. Thanks to you." She took a sip of the wine, its rich flavor a welcome sensation. "He thinks I'm at a spa in Arizona." That's what he's told everyone, that I had a nervous breakdown after the gala and needed to recover. Let him think that Declan said his gaze steady. Let him feel safe in his lies. The lion is most vulnerable when it's sleeping in its own den. Helen looked around the study at the charts on the wall, the open laptops, the legal documents stacked neatly on the table. This was her new reality. A world of strategy and consequence, a world where her knowledge was her power. "Thank you, Declan," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. "You didn't have to do any of this." "Yes, I did," he replied simply. "Your father taught me that men like Sean Butler, men who build their thrones on deceit and cruelty, cannot be allowed to stand. It's not just about business. It's about balance." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the unspoken trauma of the gala hanging between them, but also the shared purpose of the coming storm. The net had been woven its threads, a complex mixture of financial forensics art history and a burning desire for justice. All that was left was to pull it tight. The stage for Sean's downfall was set for the following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after the gala. The event was the quarterly board meeting of Butler Holdings, held in the company's opulent 50th floor boardroom. It was Sean's temple, a space designed to project power and invincibility, with a single massive mahogany table and panoramic views of the city he believed he owned. The plan was a multi-pronged synchronized assault. At 9:00 a.m., as Sean was preparing for his meeting, Patricia Chen would file her comprehensive report with the Securities and Exchange Commission, detailing the bribery and fraud, with Miles's forensic accounting as irrefutable proof. At 9:05 a.m., Dr. Alistair Beck's explosive report on the Degas forgery, co-signed by 2 other leading art authenticators, would be delivered via secured courier to Robert Lanning, the CEO of Sterling Mutual Bank. At 9:10 a.m., an award-winning investigative journalist from the Wall Street Journal, with whom Declan had a long-standing relationship built on trusted leaks, would publish a meticulously detailed exposé on Sean's fraudulent practices, citing anonymous but high-level sources. The final and most crucial piece of the plan was Helen herself. That morning, she stood before a mirror in Declan's penthouse. She was not dressed in the soft, elegant clothes she had worn for the past week. She was wearing a sharply tailored dark grey power suit, her hair pulled back in a severe professional style. Her face was pale, but her eyes were like granite. She was no longer Helen Butler, the victim. She was Helen Finch, her father's daughter, an avenging angel in bespoke tailoring. Declan entered the room holding a tablet. "It's time. The article just went live." Helen took a deep breath. "Let's begin." In the Butler Holdings boardroom, Sean was at his most arrogant. He was basking in the glow of the Tanaka deal, his board members hanging on his every word as he outlined his vision for the company's future. His phone and the phones of his board members had been placed in a basket at the entrance to ensure no interruptions, a standard procedure that would today prove to be his undoing. At precisely 9:15 a.m., the double doors to the boardroom swung open. Sean looked up, his face contorting in annoyance. I said no interruptions. His personal assistant stood there, pale and trembling. Sir, you have visitors. They insist. Through the doors walked two men in dark suits, their faces grim and official. They flashed their badges. SEC Enforcement Division. The lead agent said, his voice booming in the suddenly silent room. Sean Butler. This boardroom is now a sealed location. Nobody leaves. All electronic devices are to be surrendered. Sean shot to his feet, his face turning a blotchy red. On what grounds? This is outrageous. As if in answer, the doors opened again. This time, it was Robert Lanning from the bank, flanked by his legal team. His face was a mask of cold fury. Butler Lanning snarled, throwing a file folder onto the polished table. It skidded to a stop in front of Sean. My bank is officially calling in your $200 million loan, effective immediately due to fraudulent misrepresentation of collateral. You have 24 hours to produce the funds, or we begin asset seizure. Sean was reeling, utterly blindsided. SEC. The bank. His mind couldn't process the speed of the attack. He looked around at his board members, who were staring at him with expressions of dawning horror. And then the final blow. The doors opened one last time. Helen walked in. She moved with a calm, deliberate grace, her heels clicking purposefully on the marble floor. She didn't look like a woman who had just returned from a spa retreat for a nervous breakdown. She looked like a general taking the field of battle. Declan Reese walked in behind her, not as a savior, but as a silent, powerful ally. His presence alone sending a shockwave through the room. Sean stared at her, his mouth agape. The color drained from his face, replaced by a ghastly, pasty white. He looked at her, then at Declan, and the full scope of the conspiracy, the sheer, terrifying brilliance of the trap, finally crashed down upon him. You, he whispered, his voice, a choked, strangled sound. Helen stopped at the far end of the long table, directly opposite her husband. She was no longer in his shadow. She was his equal, his opposite. His end. Hello, Sean, she said, her voice clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the silent room. Did you enjoy the party? The board members were now frantically retrieving their phones, their screens lighting up with the damning Wall Street Journal headline, The House of Butler, a billion-dollar empire of fraud. Sean's carefully constructed world was not just cracking, it was being vaporized in real time. He was surrounded, exposed, and utterly defeated. His gaze fixed on Helen, his eyes burning with a desperate, pathetic hatred. I'll destroy you, he seethed, taking a step toward her. Before he could take another, Declan's security chief, Ben, materialized at his side, his hand subtly resting on Sean's arm, a silent, immovable barrier. Helen didn't even flinch. She looked at the pathetic, crumbling man who had terrorized her for years, and she felt nothing but a cold, clean sense of finality. No, Sean, she said, her voice echoing with the authority she had just reclaimed. You're wrong. You see, you can't destroy something that's already been burned to the ground and rebuilt itself from the ashes. I know what that's like. And now so will you. She turned her back on him, a final, symbolic act of dismissal. She had faced her monster, and she had not just won. she had annihilated him. The aftermath was a swift and brutal corporate execution. With the SEC freezing his assets and the bank seizing the collateral on his fraudulent loan, Sean Butler's empire imploded with astonishing speed. The waterfront project collapsed, taking his network of corrupt city officials with it. His board members resigned en masse, scrambling to distance themselves from the ensuing scandal. By the end of the week, Butler Holdings was a hollowed-out shell, picked apart by creditors and federal investigators. Sean himself was arrested, led out of his sterile mansion in handcuffs, a final humiliating image splashed across every news outlet. The charges were extensive: bank fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy bribery. The man who had locked his wife in a dark room to protect his reputation now found himself in a far smaller, colder cell, his name forever synonymous with disgrace. Helen watched it all unfold from a distance. She didn't revel in his suffering. Her victory wasn't about vengeance, it was about reclamation. She had reclaimed her name, her freedom, and her voice. She filed for divorce, the proceedings of which were swift and uncontested. She relinquished any claim to his fraudulent fortune, wanting nothing that was tainted by his lies. She had her own family trust, which Patricia Chen helped her place under her sole ironclad control. In the weeks that followed, she began to build a new life, not on the ashes of Sean's empire, but on the solid foundation of her own identity. She established the Alistair Finch Foundation for Art Preservation, an organization dedicated to helping museums authenticate their collections and expose forgeries. Her expertise, once a private passion dismissed by her husband, was now her public strength. The story of the forged Degas became a quiet legend in the art world, and Helen Finch was suddenly one of its most respected new voices. She and Declan settled into a new, undefined relationship. It was not a whirlwind romance born from trauma, but something quieter, deeper. A partnership built on mutual respect and a shared understanding of the darkness that can hide behind a gilded facade. He gave her space to heal and grow, acting as a trusted advisor and a steadfast friend. He was a presence in her life, not a center of gravity. Helen was her own center now. One crisp autumn evening, a month after the unveiling, Declan joined her at a gallery opening the first public event she had attended since the gala. She was surrounded by people who were listening to her, not because she was a billionaire's wife, but because of what she had to say. She was animated, passionate, and completely at ease. The profound sadness that Declan had once seen in her eyes was gone, replaced by a bright, confident light. As the evening wound down, they walked together along the Chicago River, the city lights dancing on the water. "You seem happy," Helen Declan said, his hands in his pockets. She smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached her eyes. "I feel balanced," she replied, echoing the word he had used in his study that first night. "For years I lived in a world of curated perfection, and none of it was real. Now everything is real. The challenges, the work, the freedom. It's all mine." She stopped and looked out at the skyline, at the glittering towers that represented so much ambition and power. Among them stood the nearly completed shell of the Butler Tower, its future uncertain, a dark monument to a fallen king. It no longer held any power over her. It was just a building. "What will you do now?" Declan asked. Helen looked at him, her expression thoughtful and filled with possibility. "Whatever I want." It was the simplest of answers, and the most powerful. She was not a character in someone else's story anymore. She was the author of her own, and the first chapter was finally truly beginning. The story of Helen Butler is a stark reminder that the most opulent cages are still cages. It's a testament to the fact that true strength isn't about the power you marry into, but the power you find within yourself when everything is stripped away. She was buried in darkness, but instead of being extinguished, she learned to create her own light. Her journey from a silent victim to the architect of justice shows that the most formidable weapon against a bully is a sharp mind and an unbreakable will. If this story of resilience, strategy, and ultimate triumph resonated with you, please hit the like button to let us know. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas where the silenced find their voice and the powerful finally face their reckoning. Thank you for listening.